Title: I found out my wife was cheating with the stable boy. Furious, I confronted them in the barn and made a choice that changed everything forever. When Maria finally stopped talking, her voice raw and trembling with excuses, I just stood there, staring at her. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words were stuck in my throat. It felt like a weight had settled in my chest, clawing at me, threatening to tear me apart from the inside out. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her eyes glistening with tears. It's not what you think, Clint. God help me. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But belief belonged to the man I used to be, the man who trusted her without question, who built this life with her. That man was gone now, replaced by someone harder, colder, someone who couldn't bring himself to care whether her tears were real or just another part of the lie. My fists clenched so tight my knuckles went white. Every instinct in me screamed to do something, to throw something, to shout, to let the rage rip out of me like a storm. But I didn't. I couldn't. I wasn't the kind of man who gave in to chaos. You didn't mean for it to happen? I finally said, my voice low and deliberate. That's what you've got? That's all you can say? Maria flinched, her hands trembling as she reached for a tissue. Clint, I cut her off before she could twist the knife any further. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice like steel. You're staying here because of the kids, and that's the only reason. But this ranch? It's mine. Every blade of grass, every damn stone. You don't get a say in it anymore. Her lips quivered, and for a second, I thought she might fight back. Instead, she wiped at her tear-streaked face and whispered, Clint, please, don't, I snapped, sharp enough to make her freeze. Don't say another word. You can stay, or you can leave. But if you leave, I'll take the kids, and you'll never set foot here again. Those are your choices. Now decide. She didn't answer. She just sat there, trembling, her face pale and broken. I turned and walked out of the house before I could give in to the urge to say more. Outside, the sun was sinking low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the ranch. I leaned against the fence, staring out at the land. My land. This place wasn't just dirt and fences. It was my legacy. The house Maria and I built together, the fields I'd planted with my own hands, the barn that still smelled like fresh hay. It was the dream we'd shared once, a dream that now felt like it had been ripped out from under me. I thought about those first years when the ranch was just a patch of scrub and dust. We'd bought it on a prayer, with nothing but a handshake and hope to back it up. Those first seasons were brutal. Crops failed. Livestock got sick. Money was tight. But through it all, Maria had been there, right by my side. And now? Now it all felt like a lie. I thought back to the life we'd built, the family we'd raised. I still remember the day Tommy was born, how nervous I'd been holding him for the first time. Maria had laughed at me, saying, he's not going to break, Clint. 2 years later, Jimmy came along, and then little Susan. With each child, the ranch became more than just a livelihood. It became our foundation, the glue that held us together. Or so I thought. Even as the ranch grew and the work piled on, I believed in what we were building. I believed in her. I thought we were in this together, sharing the same dream, the same fight. But somewhere along the way, we drifted. Maria started spending more time alone, riding out on the trails or disappearing into the stables for hours. She said she needed space, and I didn't argue. I figured she deserved it after everything she'd done for the kids, for the house. But now, every moment she'd spent away felt like a betrayal. Every laugh we'd shared, every kiss, every memory, it all felt tainted. I hated myself for not seeing it sooner, for being so wrapped up in the ranch, in providing for my family, that I didn't notice what was happening right in front of me. The woman I'd loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. And it burned. God, it burned. As the last light faded, I straightened up, my face set like stone. The ranch had always been my anchor, the thing that kept me steady. It would be my anchor now, too, as I figured out how to move forward. The children's laughter floated over from the barn, their voices light and innocent. They were my reason to keep going, my reason to hold it together when all I wanted to do was break. Maria could stay. For now. But I wouldn't forget. And I damn sure wouldn't forgive. You don't build a ranch like ours without a hell of a lot of sweat, grit, and sacrifice. And we sacrificed plenty. For years, it felt like every minute of my life was spent working the land, or making sure it didn't fall out from under us. The hard work didn't scare me. Hell, I thrived on it. But Maria? She was supposed to be my anchor through all of it. At least, that's what I believed. When we bought this place, it wasn't much to look at. Just a beat-up house and a barn that looked like it'd keel over if you sneezed on it. Maria and I were young then, full of big dreams and even bigger ideas about what life would look like once we'd made something of ourselves. She had this way of seeing what I couldn't. Where I saw dry soil and rusted gates, she saw potential. "This'll be the place," she'd said, running her hands along the old fence post as if she were already planting roots there. "It's going to be beautiful, Clint. You'll see." Her confidence lit a fire in me. I put everything I had into making it work. Long days turned into long weeks, and before I knew it, years had gone by. I was out in the fields from dawn till dusk, fixing equipment, building up the herd, fighting back against the land when it didn't want to cooperate. Maria was always there, right beside me. She made this house a home and gave me something to fight for. The kids came along soon after. Tommy first, then Jimmy, and finally little Susan. Each one of them brought their own kind of chaos into our lives, but they also brought joy, real joy. I still remember holding Tommy for the first time, his tiny hand gripping my finger like he already knew I'd never let him go. "This is it," Maria had whispered to me in that hospital room, her voice soft but full of something unshakable. "This is the life we dreamed about." And for a while it was. The thing about a ranch is that it doesn't care if you're tired. It doesn't care if you're stretched thin, or if the weather's bad or the market's down. It keeps demanding, keeps pulling from you, until there's nothing left to give. I should have seen it coming, the way it started to wear on Maria, but I didn't. I was too busy putting out fires, literal ones sometimes. The barn roof had to be replaced after a lightning strike. The north pasture needed replanting after a late frost. Then there was the drought, the kind that leaves you praying to whatever gods will listen just for a little rain. Maria kept things running at home. She handled the kids, the horses, the bookkeeping. At least, that's what I thought she was doing. She didn't complain much, and I didn't ask too many questions. Maybe that was my first mistake. It was around the time Susan turned 3 that I started noticing changes. Maria began writing out more, taking long stretches of time to herself. She said it was the only way she could think straight, with the kids hanging on her all day and the endless demands of the house. I didn't blame her. God knows I needed my space too. But then she started pulling away from me in other ways. She'd stay up after I went to bed, sitting out on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring out at the stars. When I asked if she was okay, she'd just say she was thinking. Thinking about what? I'd press, but she'd just shake her head and smile. "Nothing important, Clint. Don't worry about it." So, I didn't. There were good days, of course. Days when we'd pack up the kids and head to the lake. Or when Maria and I would sit on the porch, sharing a bottle of wine after the kids were asleep. She'd rest her head on my shoulder, and for a little while, it felt like we were those same kids who bought this ranch with nothing but hope and guts. But those moments became fewer and farther between. Maria seemed restless. At first, I told myself it was just a phase, that she'd snap out of it once things settled down. But deep down, I knew better. Looking back, I can see how the cracks started to form. The ranch demanded more of me than I ever thought possible, and Maria? She was left carrying the pieces of a life I didn't realize was slipping away. I poured every ounce of myself into making this place thrive, thinking that was the best way to love her. I thought if I could give her everything, a home, a family, a future, that'd be enough. But it wasn't. By the time I realized how far apart we'd grown, it was already too late. I don't know when exactly I stopped trusting Maria. Maybe it was that day I saw her coming up from the stables, her hair in disarray, her cheeks flushed, and her lips parted like she'd been running. She didn't look at me. Not really. She mumbled something about checking the tack room, but her voice sounded hollow. I remember standing there, watching her walk away, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt like I didn't know her. The stable boy, Jacob, was a young buck with too much charm and not enough sense. He'd shown up on the ranch last spring, looking for work, said he was good with horses, and he proved it too. The animals took to him like he was one of them, and I couldn't deny it was nice having someone around who could handle the tough jobs without me needing to check up on him every 5 minutes. Maria liked him right away. "He's good, Clint," she'd said after watching him break a stubborn gelding in the corral. "You made a good hire." I didn't think much of it then. Maria had always been hands-on with the horses, and I figured she appreciated having someone else who knew what they were doing. But looking back now, I realized that was when it started. At first, it was subtle. Maria started spending more time in the stables, even when she didn't need to be. I'd see her saddling a horse mid-afternoon, saying she needed a ride to clear her head. I didn't question it. I was too busy dealing with the ranch, the kids, the endless mountain of work that came with keeping this place afloat. But then I noticed Jacob. He stopped calling me sir, started avoiding me altogether. If I walked into the barn, he'd find a reason to leave, tightening a girth on a saddle, disappearing into the tack room, anywhere but where I was. At first, I thought he was just shy. Then I started to wonder if it was guilt. The moment it all came together, I was sitting on the porch late one night. The kids were in bed, and Maria was in the kitchen. She thought I couldn't hear her, but the way she was whispering into her phone, pacing back and forth like she was trying to keep her voice down, it set something off in me. I didn't hear much, just a few words. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice breaking. "He's starting to suspect something." It hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't storm into the kitchen or demand answers. Instead, I sat there on the porch, staring out into the dark, my fists clenched so hard my knuckles ached. The next morning, I followed her. She didn't know I was watching as she slipped out of the house, heading toward the stables. I stayed back, waiting in the shadows, my chest tight with anger and dread. When I finally worked up the nerve to step inside, I saw them, Maria and Jacob, standing too close, her hand on his arm. They didn't hear me come in. They were too caught up in each other, their voices low, like they were sharing some private joke. "Maria," I said, my voice cutting through the barn like a whip. She froze, her eyes wide as she spun around to face me. Jacob took a step back, his face pale as a ghost. "Clint," Maria started, her voice shaking, "this isn't what it looks like." But it was. I don't remember much of what happened next. I remember shouting, the sound of my boots on the barn floor as I crossed the space between us. I remember Jacob stammering, his words coming out in a rush. "It wasn't me," he said, his hands up in defense. She came on to me. She said she'd fire me if I didn't." "Shut your damn mouth," I snarled, my voice shaking with rage. I could feel the weight of the gun on my hip, the familiar pressure against my thigh. For a split second, I thought about drawing it, about teaching this boy a lesson he wouldn't forget. But I didn't. Instead, I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him toward the door. "You're done," I said, my voice low and steady. "Pack your things and get off my land. Now." He didn't argue. He didn't even look back as he stumbled out of the barn, his boots kicking up dust as he went. Maria was crying, her face in her hands, but I didn't care. "You're going to tell me the truth," I said, my voice cold and hard. "All of it. Right now." She tried to explain, to justify what she'd done. She said she was lonely, that I was never around, that she didn't know how else to feel alive. But all I could hear was the sound of my own heart breaking. "You made your choices," I told her. "Now you'll live with mine." I walked out of that barn knowing nothing would ever be the same. The woman I'd loved, the life we'd built, the family we'd fought for. It all felt like it was slipping through my fingers. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let her destroy everything I'd worked for. The ranch was mine. The kids were mine. And Maria? She could live with the ruins of the life she'd broken. The days after the confrontation were the hardest I'd ever lived through. And that's saying something, considering the years I've spent breaking horses, battling droughts, and burying more than one old friend under the Texas sun. None of it compared to this. Maria stayed in the house. I didn't throw her out, not right away. For the kids' sake, I told myself. Tommy, Jimmy, and Susan didn't need to see their mother packing her bags and leaving in the dead of night. They deserved better than that. But God help me, every time I saw her, my hands clenched like I was holding reins that might snap. I slept in my office. Or, I should say, I tried to sleep. Most nights, I just stared at the ceiling, playing the scene in the barn over and over in my head. Her hands on his arm, his pale, sweating face. The way she said, "I didn't mean to hurt you." Those words might as well have been a knife. The kids didn't understand, of course. They were too young to see the cracks in the walls of their world. They'd ask, "Daddy, why are you sleeping on the couch?" Or, "Why is Mama crying all the time?" I'd pat their heads, ruffle their hair, and give them some half-hearted excuse about grown-ups needing space. Tommy was the sharpest, though. He'd catch me staring out the window at the stables, my jaw tight. One night, he sat down next to me and asked, "Did Mama do something bad?" That damn near broke me. "No, son," I said after a long pause. "She just made a mistake. But we're going to be okay. I promise you that." He nodded, satisfied, but I could see the worry in his eyes. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't let this tear the family apart any more than it already had. Maria tried to apologize. She'd corner me in the kitchen, her voice trembling, begging me to let her explain. "Clint," she'd say, "I didn't mean for this to happen. It just did." But I couldn't listen. Every word she spoke sounded like nails on a chalkboard. "Save it, Maria." I'd cut her off. "You said enough in that barn." She looked broken, like a part of her had died. But the truth was, I didn't care. I couldn't care. Not anymore. Jacob didn't get off easy either. The morning after I caught them, I made some calls. I rang up every rancher in the county I trusted and told them about the boy. I didn't give them the full story, just enough to let them know he wasn't the kind of worker they wanted on their land. Not reliable, I said. Not trustworthy. Most of them didn't ask questions. Ranchers like us, we look out for each other. When you've got land and animals to manage, the last thing you need is someone bringing trouble into the mix. By the end of the day, I knew Jacob wouldn't be finding work anywhere near here. Let him try his luck in the city or some other state. As far as I was concerned, he didn't belong in this world anymore. I started working harder. Long hours out on the land, fixing fences that didn't need fixing, riding the perimeter until my legs ached. Anything to keep me out of that house. The ranch became my refuge. It always had been. But now it was the only place where I could breathe without the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. The mornings were the worst, though. Waking up, even in the cold isolation of my office, brought a fresh wave of reality crashing down on me. This was my life now. A wife I couldn't trust. A family I had to hold together with my bare hands. One evening, about a week after the barn, I finally snapped. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded in front of her, waiting for me. "Clint," she started as I walked in, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Enough," I said, my voice cold and steady. "We're not doing this anymore. I've already decided how this is going to go." Her face crumpled, but I pushed on. "You can stay here. For the kids. But this ranch? It's mine. All of it. You'll have no say, no claim. You'll stay under this roof because of them, not because of us. Do you understand me?" "And if I don't?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then you leave," I said. "But if you do, I'll take the kids. I'll fight for them with everything I've got, and I won't lose." Her tears started again, but I turned and walked out before she could say anything else. The days stretched into weeks. We lived in the same house, but it felt like we were on different planets. The kids kept me going. Every smile, every laugh. They were the reason I didn't let it all fall apart. I poured myself into the ranch, determined to protect what was mine. Maria could stay, but I'd made it clear she was living on borrowed time. After everything came crashing down, the ranch didn't stop demanding my attention. The kids didn't stop needing their father, and life didn't pause to let me sort through the wreckage Maria left behind. Every day was a balancing act, holding the family together while keeping the anger, the betrayal, and the pain buried deep enough not to break me in front of my children. Maria stayed. She was still the mother of my kids, and no matter how much I wanted her gone some days, I couldn't tear them away from her. Tommy, Jimmy, and Susan needed their mother, even if I didn't know who she was anymore. I slept in my office most nights, on that old worn-out couch with a throw blanket that barely reached my knees. It wasn't about comfort. Comfort had no place in my life anymore. It was about distance. The same distance that had been growing between Maria and me for years, only now, it was visible, tangible. I'd catch her sometimes, sitting at the kitchen table after the kids were asleep, her head in her hands. She wasn't crying, not always. Just sitting there, staring at nothing, like she was trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. I wanted to ask her why. Why wasn't I enough? Why did she let everything we built together fall apart? But I knew no answer would ever make it better. The kids noticed, of course. They weren't stupid. Tommy especially. One evening, as I was tucking him into bed, he looked at me with those sharp, knowing eyes of his and asked, "Daddy, are you mad at Mama?" The question stopped me cold. I sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall as I tried to figure out how to answer. "I'm not mad, son," I finally said. "I'm disappointed. Because of something she did?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, but she's still your mama, and she loves you. That's what matters." He seemed to accept that, but I saw the worry in his face. The kids felt the cracks, even if they didn't understand them, and it killed me. Maria tried to talk to me a few times. Her words were always the same. Apologies, explanations, promises. I let her say her piece, but I never gave her what she wanted. "Clint," she said one night, finding me in the barn as I finished brushing down one of the horses. "I know I've said I'm sorry, but I'll keep saying it for as long as it takes. I hate what I did. I hate myself for it." I didn't look at her. Hating yourself doesn't change what happened. "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't expect you to forgive me. Not now. Maybe not ever. But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right if you let me." I finally turned to face her. She looked like a shadow of the woman I'd married. Worn down, tired, and full of regret. "Maria," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you. But if I do, it won't be today. Or tomorrow. It'll be a long time from now. When I can think about what you did and not feel like it's tearing me apart." She nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. "I'll wait," she whispered, "as long as it takes." The ranch became my lifeline. The endless work of keeping it running was the only thing that kept me steady. I threw myself into it, fixing fences, training horses, and planting the south field. The kids' laughter was a reminder that not everything was broken. They were my reason to keep going, to hold it together when all I wanted to do was let the anger consume me. And Maria? She stayed in the house, taking care of the kids, keeping her distance when she could. The pain didn't fade, not really, but it dulled, just enough to let me breathe again. I don't know if I'll ever forgive her. Maybe one day, when the hurt isn't so raw, I'll be able to see her as the woman I married, not the one who broke my heart. Maybe I'll find it in me to let go of the bitterness and the anger. But for now, I'll take it one day at a time. I'll pour myself into this ranch, into my kids, into the life we're still trying to piece back together. Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about moving forward. And if there's one thing I know, it's that life doesn't wait for you to catch up. The ranch stands, as it always has. The kids laugh, as they always will. And me? I'll keep going. I'll keep fighting. And maybe someday, when the dust has settled and the scars have faded, I'll figure out what's next. For now, the ranch is enough.